Crochet Crafter, welcome to this week's Crochet Friday. So this week we are going to be doing the Jasmine Stitch, which is this super gorgeous puff stitch that ends up looking like a flower. And I gotta be honest with you, I think this is probably the most daunting one so far in this series, but even if you're a beginner, don't let that turn you away. I did find very mixed feelings about this pattern online, especially when I was first learning it. On one blog article, they'd be talking about the Jasmine Stitch and they'd say it's actually considered great for beginners. You'd go to the next one and they'd say this is one of the most challenging stitches in crochet. So whether it's easy or hard, I don't really know how to give you a good gauge for that because I think it just depends on the person. What I will say is if you are a beginner and you have not tried tackling a puff stitch, then this project it might take a little bit of getting used to. I will say for me, it definitely took me a bit of trial and error to really feel confident in this pattern, but what I will say is just like when you learned how to first do a double crochet, what did you do? You had to do it over and over and over and over again, but now as you have more experience, you think of the double crochet, you're like, oh yeah, super easy. So same kind of concept here. The first few times you do it, it's gonna feel a little weird, but I'm gonna walk you through this so that way you will be able to do it, and then once you practice it a couple times, or maybe a couple dozen times in my case, you will be able to get the hang of this. I believe in you. So let's jump into this project. Just kidding. Before we jump into that, I wanted to show you this to like inspire you, I guess. And I don't know why this is in a bag, by the way. But this is one that my great grandmother crocheted. She added some little like detailing in here, and I don't know how she did this amazing loop-de-loo on the end. If you're watching this and you know how to add the loop-de-loo on the end, let me know. I would love to know how to do that. And then I think she must have sewn together several of these because it's like, I mean, this puff stitch gets pretty thick, but this is like way thicker. I don't know, it's super cute the way that she sewed the centers of the flowers in, but I just wanted to show this because I feel like I'm coming full circle, you know, like my great grandmother's crocheted this, and now I'm crocheting this, and you can crochet it too. I don't know, there's something about the like history and legacy of crochet and the, you know, intergenerational aspect of it that I just love. But anyways, we're going to jump into this project now. So first of all, let's talk about what you need to know for this project. Stitches you need to know. You need to know how to do the chain, how to do the single crochet, and if you're familiar with the puff stitch, this will definitely help you. But if you don't already know how to do a puff stitch, that's totally okay because I'm gonna show you how to do that and I'm gonna give you lots of tips and pointers for how to do it well and what's going to make it the easiest and tips for troubleshooting. And quite honestly, even the single crochet isn't worked quite the way we think of a single crochet, but if you have a good foundation with doing single crochet and chain stitches, you will be able to tackle this project. I also want to talk about how this is worked up before we even get into the project, so that way you really understand where I'm saying to work. So this one, it's a little wonky looking because this is like my beginning test swatch, and then I was working rows this way, and then I suddenly changed which direction I was working and then worked along the side. So this one's a little wonky looking. But here's the basic way that this works up. We're going to start by crocheting some puff stitches. So I'm going to use this oval here to call it a puff stitch. So we're going to do, instead of a foundation chain, we're going to make this chain of puff stitches. Just like so. So this is going to be row 1. Okay? Then here's how we're going to work row 2. We're going to work one freestanding puff stitch on the side there, and then we're going to work 3 puff stitches together. So the way it's going to work is we think about our yarn, we're attached right here, we're going to work a puff stitch here, a puff stitch into this spot here, and a puff stitch there, and then pull our yarn through and join all 3 of those puff stitches together. And then we're going to do that again. We're going to work a puff stitch going across like horizontal, a puff stitch at that diagonal, and then a puff stitch in between the next set of puff stitches, and then we'll pull them all through to join them together. Show you that again. We do this 3-part puff stitch where we work one here, here, and here, and I'll show you how to connect them. And then to finish up the row, work one horizontal, work one at the diagonal, and work one up and down, and of course join them all together. So from this guy and then all these, this is row 2. So then row 3 is going to be the same way as row 2, where we start with our just one freestanding puff stitch going up, and then we're going to work across, diagonal, and down, and join them all together. Of course, we'll have turned our work, so we won't really be working to the left. Do our 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Join them together. 1, 2, 3. Join them together. And as you can see, as we do more rows of it, it starts to create these 6-pointed flowers, if you will, or like a jasmine kind of flower. I guess that's probably why it's called a jasmine stitch, like a jasmine flower. I'll have to Google pictures of a jasmine flower to see if it actually looks like a jasmine flower. But anyways, I wanted to show you this first because when you look at this, it can be like, whoa, what even counts as a row? This is what counts as a row. Those clusters of 3. So like this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing, that's a row. This would be like row 3. I wanted to show you that before we jump into it, so when I'm actually talking about things, it makes a little bit more sense. All right, enough illustrations. Let's actually crochet. I am using this gorgeous yarn. It's a Hobby Lobby. I love this yarn, which I'm kind of a super fan of now. I've been using it a lot, and it's just so pretty, and I like it kind of has like a shine to it. It's very soft. Like I've been doing in basically all my videos is I'm using a size H 5mm hook. I don't know why, I just keep gravitating towards this hook. Again, you can do this project with whatever yarn you want and just pick an appropriate hook size. I would recommend though starting with some kind of yarn that's just very simple, like you know, Hobby Lobby, I love this yarn, or Red Heart Super Saver. I would advise learning this on a yarn that's got a lot of texture in it, like a Lion brand homespun. That's just gonna add more headache and heartache to learn this project. And we want learning this to be as simple as possible. So here's what we want to do. We want to start by putting a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to start by chaining 1. Now it's time to create our first puff. So remember, if we think about my little diagram, we're gonna work these puffs across the bottom. So here's what we're gonna start off by working. We're going to work this first puff right there. So all we've done so far is we put a slip knot on our hook and then we chained 1. Now what we want to do is we want to yarn over and we want to do basically a chain, but we're going to pull this loop kind of big. Now the question that a lot of people wonder when they first start this, and that I kind of wonder, is how do you know how big to pull it? There's not really a right or wrong. What you want to do is you want to be consistent. If you pull this first one this big, you want to pull all your loops for the rest of this project this big. If you only go this big, you want to pull all your loops for the project this big. So I'm probably like a thumb's width across, so I'm gonna pull it over, okay? Now what we need to do next is we need to yarn over and make a big loop. So here's what happens sometimes. If we try to yarn over like normal, where we just catch it like this, we end up, see how our loop is now shorter, so we don't want to do a yarn over like that. Here's what I find works best to not accidentally pull the loops on my hook too tight. What I like to do is I like to put my pointer finger on my right hand securely on the yarn piece and the hook, and then with my left hand and I'm also holding down here, so I'm basically pulling this tight, if you will, and keeping it so it can't go bigger or smaller by the tension in my right hand. And then with my left hand, I'm going to loosely drape it over, and then to make sure that this loop doesn't pull my first loop too tight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger on it and I'm going to pull my yarn just like that to make sure that I'm not, you know, taking out the tension. Okay, once we do that, we're gonna kind of do this chain and then loop over pattern. So I'm gonna go to my very first single crochet, which is right here, and insert my hook. Again, I'm keeping my fingers on these loops so that way I don't change the tension. And I'm gonna go into that very first chain space. Then yarn over and pull up a loop. Now this is important. As you pull up this loop, it might try to pull this second loop tighter, so make sure you keep your finger on there securely. And again, I'm gonna make sure and kind of really pull my project apart so that way I know that my loops are all even. So that's my third loop on my hook. I'm gonna put my finger on and really securely hold them in place. And we're gonna yarn over again and create another loop. So once I get the loop on there, I like to pull at the base here and let my yarn just kind of slide there so that I know that this yarn over will be the same height as all these other loops. We're going to then repeat that process where we insert into that first chain, so it's the same loop where all these other strings of yarn are coming from. Going through there, pull up a loop, and just let it pull through big. I like to keep my tension in my left hand really loose so that way I can pull my loops through. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on my hook, making sure they're all the same height. Put my finger here, yarn over. Again, with the yarn over, I'm gonna size it down. Size it to be the correct size by pulling tension here and pulling my hook tension here so I can get it to be the right size. And then one last time, we're going to go into that chain space, yarn over, and pull up a loop, making sure we pull that loop to be the same size as all of our other loops here. So you might have noticed a pattern repeating, and you're going to do that pattern where you insert and pull up a loop, and then yarn over, and then insert and pull up a loop until you have 7 loops on your hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To finish off the puff stitch, we're going to yarn over and pull through. But what I like to do is I like to catch the tail end of my yarn. I like to hold my finger here, so I'm gonna yarn over, yes, but to make sure I don't pull that yarn over too tight, I'm gonna catch my finger right under here and hang on to this loop because we're going to need it. Once I've got the yarn over on my hook and I'm catching it with the pointer finger of my left hand, I'm going to hold at the base of my loops and then just kind of turn my hook and gently pull it through all those loops. So I have all those loops going through this yarn piece here, and I've got this loop underneath my finger and my tail of yarn feeding out that way. Basically, we're going to work kind of like a single crochet into this loop here. So I'm going to first put this loop on my hook, and then to make sure my tension's correct, I hold the base here and just tighten this all, so I tighten this side loop and this loop. And then I'm going to basically work a single crochet. So yarn over, pull a loop through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. And just like that, you have completed your first puff stitch. Give yourself a pat on the back because that is no easy feat, but I believe in you, and hopefully you were able to get the hang of it. If you did not get the hang of it, don't sweat it because we're gonna go through it all again for our next puff stitch. We've worked there, now we're gonna do this puff stitch here. So this puff stitch is worked the exact same way, just we've gotta know where we want to actually insert our hook. So what I want to do is I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull it to be the length that I want. So again, I'm going about the width of my thumb is about how big I'm pulling it. And then we're going to do our yarn over, insert and pull up, yarn over, insert and pull up until we get 7 loops on here. So that's how we do our puff stitch. So I'm going to yarn over. Again, I like to pull my tension, I like to pull this down so I size the loop to be correct. I'm going to hold that loop in place so I don't lose it. And then we're going to go in basically where all the ends of our first puff stitch are going into. We're gonna go, it's kind of like inside that single crochet. Find that spot, switch your hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And again, make sure you pull it all the way to be the same size as your first loops. We're gonna repeat that 2 more times. Yarn over, catch it with my pointer finger, insert into the same spot, catch the yarn and pull up a loop. Do it 1 more time, yarn over, make sure it's sized correctly, catch it with our right hand finger, insert into that space there where all our yarn pieces are coming from, yarn over, catch that yarn, and pull up a loop nice and big, okay? So we have 7 loops on our hook, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now it's time to basically do that single crochet. So remember, we're gonna yarn over, but hang on to this yarn. Catch it with your index finger in your left hand. Pull that yarn over through. Now, sometimes this is tricky pulling it through all the loops because you sometimes end up accidentally snagging the yarn. Make sure you don't snag the yarn. It's the same thing, the same loop, the same thread, the working thread coming through. What I find helps me prevent from catching on it is if I hold tension at the base of my puff stitch because it kind of keeps the loops themselves nice and open where I'm less likely to snag on them. So once I've got this pulled through, I'm gonna go under the piece that we were holding on to. And then I like to do this because I think it just helps with my tension. Pull on my tail end of yarn to just kind of work out the extra tension. And to size this loop down, and then I'm gonna yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and that's basically working that single crochet stitch. So I'm going to repeat just working this long chain of puff stitches across until I have as many as I want. So basically we've done this, I'm gonna do 2 more, and then I'll show you what we do next in our project. So here we go. I have crocheted my first 4, and now it's time to start on row 2. So to start a row, we're going to need to do one that's a freestanding puff stitch, and this has worked exactly the same way. We work these first 4, we're just going to think of it as being working upward, even though we're working it the exact same way. So let's go through the puff stitch again, just so we get a really good feel for it. Yarn over, pull up a loop, is our first loop. Then I'm gonna yarn over for a second loop. Insert here where all these other loops are going into from our previous puff. Pull up a loop, that's 3. Yarn over for 4. Insert and pull up a loop for 5. Yarn over for 6. Insert into that same spot and pull up a loop for 7. To finish it off, yarn over, but catch that yarn over the inside of it with your index finger of your left hand. So remember, I like to pinch down here and just kind of pull my hook up this way to get the yarn to come and the hook to slide right through without snagging on any of these loops. Go under that loop right there. I'm gonna cinch this down just to give myself a little bit better tension. And then we're gonna work a single crochet basically in this spot here. So that means we yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. So even though we worked that puff stitch the exact same way we worked these first 4, we're going to think of that one as actually sitting right here. So sitting vertical, if you will. On my little diagram, we just did this. So now it's time to work our cluster of 3 puff stitches. So basically we're gonna do a puff stitch here, and a puff stitch here, and we're gonna join them all together. That might sound overwhelming. I promise it's not as bad as it sounds. So the first one, we're going to work that one that goes across this way. It's going to start very similar to what we've been doing, but we're not going to actually finish it off. So here we go. We're gonna yarn over, pull up a loop, kind of make it a little bit big. That's our first loop. Yarn over for a second loop. Insert our hook into where all these other loops from our previous puff stitch end. Yarn over and pull up a loop for a third. Yarn over for number 4. Insert into the same spot, pull up a loop for number 5. Yarn over for 6. Insert and pull up a loop for 7. Now once you have 7 loops on your hook, we're gonna stop. This is where things get a little icky because we're gonna just hold these on our hook. So this is this top one going across right here. We just did this. Now you need to do this one right in there. So we're going to work a puff stitch, but we're going to work it into here. So to do this, I'm gonna keep my finger here on these loops so I don't change the tension there. But I'm going to come back, not here, but to that juncture of puff stitches. So come back one juncture to the second juncture, insert my hook there, and pull up a loop. And I'm gonna size it to pull it about, even with these ones on my hook. So that's loop 1 of this puff stitch. Yarn over for 2, insert into the same spot down here, yarn over and pull up for 3, yarn over for 4, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop for 5, yarn over for 6, and insert down here, pull up a loop for 7. So now I've got 2 puff stitches that I haven't actually fastened off, but I've got this first puff stitch and a second puff stitch on my hook. And our little diagram, that's this part right here. Now it's time to do the next one, that third one. To know where to work, I'm gonna come to the left 1 puff stitch juncture. That's kind of what I'm calling these spaces where all the ends of our puff stitches end up. So I'm gonna make sure I hang on to this to keep my tension here good so I don't accidentally, pull this yarn and tighten down that last loop. I'm gonna make sure our tension stays even. But I'm gonna come to this next juncture, insert my hook, pull up a loop, and I'm gonna make it, about even with these other ones. It's my first loop, yarn over for 2, insert into that same juncture, pull up a loop for 3. Now make sure you're doing this that these ones don't slide off the end. Make sure it all stays on your hook. So that's 3, yarn over for 4, insert in the juncture, pull up a loop for 5, yarn over for 6, insert and pull up that 7th loop. So at this point, we have these 3 puff stitches all on our hook at once, and it's time we're gonna finish them all off all together to join them. So to do this, we're gonna yarn over, and again, I'm gonna catch this intersection of my yarn with my index finger on my left hand, and I'm gonna pull this loop through all of them. What I found works the best is if I try to pull through one puff stitch at a time. So that's the first puff stitch, through the second puff stitch, and through the third puff stitches. When I tried to pull through all three of them just blindly, what usually happened was I snagged some extra yarn in the center of the puff stitch, and then it didn't look as nice. So now I've got these 3 puff stitches joined together, and I've got this loop that I'm holding with my index finger on my left hand. I want to insert my hook through there, and then this is really important. We want to make sure we have good tension. What I like to do is I like to just take this and just cinch it tight. So I don't cinch it all the way tight, but as you see, when I pull on this one, it pulls on this loop, which in turn pulls on the loop where our hook is inserted under. So I like to pull it fairly snug, and I find that gives me the best results and keeps me the most consistent. But then once you've snugged it down, now we're gonna work that single crochet stitch to finish this off. So I'm gonna yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And that is how we work the 3 puff stitches together. So this one right here is that last one we did. I'll highlight that one. And I just drew this little curve there to indicate that we worked them all together. So if we look at our diagram, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna keep repeating these 3 stitches together. So we're gonna work this one, then this puff stitch, and then join them all together. Work a puff stitch, puff stitch, puff stitch, join them all together, puff stitch, puff stitch, puff stitch, join them all together. So I'm going to work these next 2, and then I'll show you this 3rd one and also how we work up to our next row. So here we are. I've worked these middle 2 clusters of 3 puff stitches the same way I worked this first one, but I'm going to show you the process again. I just wanted to do it on these end ones so you really see where to go in. But basically, I worked this puff, this puff, this puff, and then join them all together. This puff, this puff, this puff, and then join them all together. And now we're going to work this last cluster of 3 puffs. This will give you a feel for how to work these 3 puff stitches together. So you just really make sure you know what's going on. So to start, we're going to yarn over and basically do a chain and pull this loop up to the size we want. Yarn over for our second loop. And where we insert when we work this top, this first of the 3 puffs, is going to be in this puff section right here where all the other puffs end up. So we're going to go in there, yarn over, pull up our 3rd loop, yarn over for our 4th loop, insert where all the other puffs end for our 5th loop, yarn over for 6th, insert and pull up our 7th. This is our first puff stitch. So the second puff stitch is going to be worked in the same ending space where we worked the 3rd puff from our previous 3 cluster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up 7 in this spot. So I'm going to insert, pull up a loop, get it to be, try to make it be the same height as the other ones. If it's not exact, it's going to still work out okay. And as you do this more, you'll better learn how to manage your tension. Yarn over for a 2nd loop, insert down here into that juncture, pull up a 3rd loop, yarn over for a 4th loop, pull up a 5th loop, yarn over a 6th loop, and pull up that 7th loop. So that's 1 puff, 2 puff, and then our last puff is going to be worked at the very end here. So if we were working in the middle, we would just work in the next puff juncture, like between 2 of our puffs, but here we're just going to work it down at the very end. I'm going to insert my hook into that very end section there, pull up my 1st loop, size it to be the right size, yarn over my 2nd loop, insert into that same spot, pull up my 3rd loop, yarn over for a 4th loop, insert and pull up a 5th loop, yarn over for a 6th loop, and insert and pull up that 7th loop. Once I have all 3 of my puffs on here, I'm going to yarn over, and this is very important, make sure you catch the spot. If you yarn over and pull through without catching the spot, it's nearly impossible to find this section. So once I've got it on here, I'm gonna pull through my puffs, and I like to go through one puff at a time to make sure I made it through okay. So like this one, I picked up some extra thread, so I'm gonna make sure I end up with just my yarn over, section from my working yarn. Let's pull it through the second puff and through the third puff. Once I'm through all 3 puffs, I'm gonna insert my hook under that loop that I held with my finger, and then I'm gonna pull on my working end of yarn to just work out a lot of that slack. And then yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. So this is our first row, and now it's time to work our second row, and the way the second row is worked is really similar to what we just did, and we'll be able to keep repeating it as many times as we want for as many rows as we want. So in our little graph here, we've done through this section. First thing we need to do is work this guy right here. This is just a freestanding upright puff stitch. So let's go ahead and work this one. And it's a very important step that's gotta happen. So we're gonna work this puff stitch, start off the same way we do, where we yarn over, pull through, and we pull up our loop. But very important, once you pull up the first loop, you want to turn your work. If you try to turn later on, it's gonna make your edges messy, but if you turn your work now, it'll keep your edges looking really good and your puffs on your side looking just like all the other puffs. So make sure that after you pull up that first loop, you turn your work over. But then from here, we're gonna complete a puff stitch, just working a single puff stitch like normal. So yarn over for a second loop, insert here into this puff juncture is what I'm kind of calling them, and pull up a third loop, yarn over a fourth loop, insert into the juncture and pull up a fifth loop, yarn over a sixth loop, insert and pull up a seventh loop. To finish it off, we're going to yarn over, catch this inner piece here, pull that through all our little puffs there, insert our hook under that section we held on to, and you can size some of the tension down a little bit. Then yarn over, pull it up, yarn over, pull through 2. So this is that one that's right on the side, and now it's time to work our 3 cluster where we work here, here, and here. We work a puff in each of those spots and then join them together. And this is going to look really similar to what we did here on the previous row, but I'll go ahead and show it to you again so you really can see exactly how this works out. So start by yarning over and pulling up a loop, yarn over for our second one. So where we're going to insert here is very important. We're going to come to the top of this puff stitch and insert. So right in this little space created from doing that single crochet there, if you will, that right there is where we're going to insert. Pull up our third loop, yarn over, go to the same spot there, then pull up our fifth loop, yarn over for our sixth loop, insert and pull up our seventh loop. That's our first puff stitch. Our second puff stitch, we're going to work right in here. So that right kind of section where we worked the previous puff stitch. It's going right there. Yarn over, pull up a loop, size it to be of the same height as all your other loops. Yarn over for a second loop, insert in that juncture, and pull up a third loop. Yarn over a fourth loop, insert and pull up a sixth loop, or fifth loop, yarn over a sixth loop, insert and pull up a seventh loop. Counting gets a little tricky sometimes. So first puff, second puff, work over to our next juncture is where we're going to work that third puff. So insert and pull up a loop, yarn over for a second loop, pull up our third loop, yarn over our fourth loop, pull up our fifth loop, yarn over our sixth loop, pull up our seventh loop, and now we have 3 puffs, 1, 2, 3. To fasten them all off, we're going to yarn over, catch that inner spot there with your pointer finger, your index finger. Then we're going to pull it through each of our puffs. Again, I like to pull through 1 puff at a time to make sure I don't snag any additional threads. So it's 1 puff, 2 puff, and 3 puff. Insert my hook into that loop there. And I like to pull down, get out as much of the tension as I can. And you can get out a lot of the tension because you basically then introduce tension as we do this next yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. That kind of allows the tension to adjust. So even though we seem to like we're pulling really tight when we put them all together, it's actually not going to end up as tight because we have more loops that we pull up that allow for a little more stretch and give. So that's our 3 cluster. We'll need to do 3 more of those 3 clusters to finish this row. I'll show you this cluster one more time just to make sure you really got the feel for it, but going forward it's going to be the same process where we just keep repeating this row that we're on over and over until it's the size we want. So showing you the 3 cluster one last time. Yarn over and pull up a loop and kind of stretch it long. Yarn over for a second loop. So our first puff is going to be worked in the puff to the right. So we're going to go in there, pull up our 3rd loop, yarn over for 4, insert into the juncture, pull up for 5, yarn over for 6, and pull up that 7th loop. That's our first puff. Second puff, we go to the bottom right there at the base. This is going to be the 6th one into this section, the 6th puff into this same spot. So we're going to work where all the other puffs are. Insert, pull up a loop, yarn over for 2, insert and pull up loop 3, yarn over for our 4th loop, insert and pull up loop 5, yarn over our 6th loop, insert and pull up loop 7. That's our second puff right there. Then our 3rd puff, we're going to just go over to the left and work in that next juncture. So insert our hook, pull up a loop, yarn over for our 2nd loop, pull up our 3rd loop, yarn over our 4th loop, insert and pull up our 5th loop, yarn over our 6th loop, insert and pull up our 7th loop. Once we have our 3 puffs on our hook, I'm going to yarn over, make sure you catch this with your index finger, and pull that yarn over through each of my puffs. Once I pull it through, I'm going to insert my hook underneath the section that I held onto with my finger, and then pull out the tension, size it down, and this will just make it for a better hold so that you don't end up with big, huge holes, but just kind of, you know, nicely filled in holes. So once we size it down, then we're going to yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. That's how we work that 3 cluster. We'll keep working it across, and then we will just go back to the start the same way we started this row to start our next row, keep working across, and that, my friends, is how you do the Jasmine stitch. Give yourself a big pat on the back because this is something that you should be very proud of if you're able to get the hang of it. So there you go, that is how you do the Jasmine stitch. A couple of pointers I'll give you. The first is that the tension is really key. What ends up happening to me when I first started this and I didn't quite have a good feel for how to maintain the tension is when I'd pull up my loops, they'd end up getting sized way down, so I didn't actually have these nice puffs, and I just had these little weird knots that you couldn't actually get to work out to be the nice flower Jasmine stitch. So make sure that you're really loose with your tension when you're making the loops of the puff. So those 7 loops that you hold for the puff, make sure that you keep your tension really loose. I think that it's better to err on the loose side versus on the too tight side because it's a lot easier as long as you're staying loose to adjust it to the appropriate tightness. But if you're starting off tight, it's a lot harder to go back and make looser. So that's one pointer. Second pointer is it's probably gonna feel weird. That is okay, just go with it. Don't give up, keep trying. And I am very confident that you will be able to get the hang of this stitch. And the third thing is, this is definitely a yarn eater of a project. If you're not familiar with that term, basically it means a project that uses a lot of your yarn. It basically eats through your yarn stash. So I'm not making this into anything, so I'm actually going to unwind all the work we just did. It's so beautiful. But because I don't want to use all this yarn just as this little swath, because this is a lot of yarn here. But all of that aside, I think this is one of the most beautiful and just very classic looking crochet stitches that are out there. It is so thick and plush. Like this would be an amazing, like if you wanted to make a bedspread, this would basically could be your comforter. It's that thick and that soft. And so, you know, it's made with these little puffs, so that makes it very puffy. So it has a lot of, you know, nice soft squish to it. And I do truly think that this is a gorgeous design, gorgeous pattern, and it's definitely one that I think is worth learning. But thank you for sticking with me through this probably very long tutorial. I hope that you found this video helpful and you were able to get the hang of it. Let me know how this project goes for you down in the comments below. I always love hearing from you guys, and I will catch you in next week's Crochet Friday. Happy crafting!